When evacuation orders hit, the danger does not arrive with explosions or firestorms, but with silent traffic paralysis, fuel depletion, and the sudden collapse of assumptions that have guided modern life for decades. Roads transform into linear traps. Cities bleed outward into scarcity, and the majority of people unknowingly flee toward the highest competition zones at the exact moment resilience matters most. What almost no one understands is that survival during mass evacuation is not about distance from danger, but about geometry flow, control energy, demand, and human behavior under stress. Some places do not empty when crises begin, they harden. The immediate problem is not the catastrophe itself, whether it is infrastructure failure, prolonged grid collapse, chemical release, or regional instability, but the predictable human response that follows it. Emergency management data shows that more than 70% of the population attempts to evacuate along identical routes within the same time. Window driven by official guidance, social mirroring, and fear-based decision compression. This creates a cascading failure, where transportation systems exceed capacity, fuel distribution halts, supply chains freeze, and law enforcement becomes overwhelmed before the threat even arrives. The paradox is that leaving often increases exposure to secondary risks like dehydration, violence, hypothermia, and medical emergencies. Most people misunderstand the situation because they believe danger radiates outward, evenly from a central point, and safety lies simply farther away. This assumption ignores how modern systems fail. Power grids do not collapse evenly, they fragment. Communication networks do not disappear instantly, they degrade asymmetrically. Food access does not vanish everywhere, it concentrates where fewer people remain. Evacuation messaging is designed to reduce liability and congestion near critical infrastructure, not to optimize individual survival probability. Following, it blindly places people into environments where competition exceeds resources within hours. The hidden principle beneath successful survival locations is not secrecy or isolation, but negative population flow combined with structural inertia. When people leave en masse, they abandon environments that still retain physical protection, stored materials, controlled access points, and latent energy efficiency. These environments become fortresses, not because they were designed as shelters, but because their design characteristics only reveal their strength once. Population density collapses. The science here is rooted in load reduction. When demand falls faster than supply capacity, resilience spikes. The first location that consistently becomes stronger as others evacuate is dense urban commercial structures built of reinforced concrete, particularly multi-story office buildings constructed after modern fire codes but before glass-dominant architecture took over. These structures are engineered to handle extreme static loads, lateral wind forces, seismic activity, and internal fire containment. When offices empty, these buildings retain climate stability, internal stairwells, mechanical floors, backup generators, water, risers, and controlled access points, while losing the one factor that makes them dangerous: human congestion. From a technical perspective, reinforced concrete has thermal mass properties that slow internal temperature changes by hours or days, reducing heating and cooling needs during grid instability. Fire-rated stairwells act as vertical bunkers, isolated from smoke and external exposure. Mechanical floors often contain diesel generators, sized for partial building operations designed to support emergency lighting, elevators, and communication systems. Water systems include gravity-fed tanks intended for firefighting that can be repurposed short-term for sanitation and drinking when filtered. Elevation alone reduces flood risk ground level, violence exposure, and airborne particulate concentration. Historical evidence supports this counterintuitive advantage. During prolonged blackouts in New York City, sections of commercial buildings remained habitable long after surrounding residential zones became unsafe due to crime overheating and water loss. In post-earthquake, Tokyo reinforced commercial structures retained integrity, while lighter residential housing suffered widespread failure. During Hurricane Katrina, some office buildings with functioning generators and water tanks remained structurally secure, while surrounding neighborhoods descended into chaos due to population pressure and supply collapse. The practical survival implication is that these locations reward those who understand access timing. Entering before full evacuation completes allows positioning without conflict. Remaining after population outflow reduces visibility and competition. The building itself becomes a layered defense system, offering elevation-controlled entry points, internal compartmentalization, and environmental buffering. However, this advantage only holds temporarily. Fuel depletion generator, wear and eventual external scavenging shift the risk curve upward with time. As evacuation continues, another dynamic emerges. Law enforcement and emergency services retreat from low-density zones to protect critical corridors, unintentionally leaving hardened structures under-monitored but uncontested. This creates a window where stability increases before decay begins. Recognizing this timing separates survivable refuge from delayed entrapment, and it forces a deeper question about which environments gain strength, as others empty, and which merely appear safe until systems fail completely. The next location follows a similar pattern, but operates on an entirely different physical principle, one rooted not in height and mass, but in depth, pressure, equilibrium, and thermal isolation. And it becomes even more misunderstood, precisely because people flee away from it instinctively. Depth alters risk in ways surface-level thinking fails to account for, and as evacuation accelerates, underground infrastructure becomes paradoxically safer, not because threats vanish, but because exposure pathways collapse faster than access routes. The second location that hardens during mass departure is subterranean transit and utility adjacent spaces, constructed for continuous human presence, yet abandoned almost instantly when movement systems shut down. These environments include underground parking structures, service tunnels, maintenance corridors, and portions of metro systems outside flood-prone zones, all of which are engineered around pressure management, fire isolation, and structural redundancy rather than comfort. The immediate fear most people associate with underground spaces is entrapment, suffocation, or flooding. Yet, this fear ignores the engineering intent behind these structures. Modern subterranean systems are built to withstand soil load, hydrostatic pressure, seismic displacement, and prolonged fire exposure. Ventilation shafts are designed to manage smoke movement and air exchange, even when powered systems fail using pressure differentials rather than active fans. Concrete walls, several feet thick, provide ballistic resistance and thermal buffering that surface structures cannot match. When human traffic vanishes, the primary hazard becomes time, not immediacy. What people misunderstand is that underground danger is almost always linked to human density. Stampedes, fires, and oxygen depletion events historically occurred during peak occupancy. When evacuation clears these spaces, oxygen demand drops to near zero, heat generation disappears, and acoustic and visual concealment increase dramatically. At the same time, external chaos becomes irrelevant. Riots, looting, and environmental exposure cannot penetrate mass earth coverage without heavy equipment or sustained intent, both of which become unlikely during generalized collapse. The overlooked scientific principle here is thermal inertia, combined with environmental decoupling. Subterranean spaces remain near the annual mean ground temperature of the region, often between 10 and 15 degrees Celsius, regardless of surface extremes. This drastically reduces caloric expenditure needed to maintain body temperature, preserving energy and hydration. Noise transmission drops exponentially, with depth lowering detection risk. Airborne contaminants disperse more slowly, but they also arrive later, offering critical warning time when coupled with airflow awareness. Technical breakdown reveals further advantages. Underground parking structures include ramp choke points that can be visually monitored and physically blocked with minimal materials. Drainage systems are gravity-fed, reducing reliance on pumps in many designs. Structural columns are overbuilt to account for vehicle loads, providing cover and segmentation. Utility tunnels often run parallel to communication, and power lines offering access to materials like copper wiring, fiber conduits, and water mains, which when handled correctly can extend survivability without requiring surface exposure. History repeatedly validates this pattern. During the Blitz in London, underground stations functioned as de facto shelters, precisely because their design isolated occupants from explosive overpressure and shrapnel. In more recent conflicts, civilian survival rates increased dramatically in populations that utilized underground infrastructure, early before mass congestion rendered them dangerous. During prolonged heat waves and winter outages, subterranean spaces have consistently recorded lower mortality rates among those who reached them before panic-driven overcrowding. Practically, the value of these locations hinges on selectivity and restraint. Occupying peripheral or service sections rather than main transit platforms reduces flood risk and discovery. Avoiding low points near water tables or storm drains minimizes sudden inundation. Establishing passive airflow awareness rather than modifying ventilation preserves concealment. Most importantly, exit timing must remain flexible. Underground safety degrades rapidly once scavenging spreads or flooding patterns shift. As evacuation drains the surface, another form of fortress emerges, not below ground or above it, but embedded within the overlooked edges of human settlement, where infrastructure thins but does not vanish. These places survive, not by resisting collapse, but by falling beneath its notice entirely, and they reveal how invisibility can become a form of armor. As populations surge outward from urban cores, attention narrows to highways, shelters, and visible hubs of aid, while the transitional zones between dense settlement and true wilderness are stripped of human presence, without ever becoming targets. The third location that hardens during evacuation exists in these margins. Industrial fringe zones, composed of small-scale warehouses, light manufacturing facilities, agricultural processing sites, and logistics depots. Positioned just outside metropolitan boundaries, these places are abandoned early because they lack perceived comfort, yet they retain disproportionate structural and material advantages. Once evacuation pressure peaks, the problem most people fail to recognize is that danger tracks attention. Violence, competition, and scarcity cluster where people believe resources exist. Industrial fringe zones fall outside evacuation narratives because they are neither residential nor symbolic. Emergency services deprioritize them. Media ignores them, and evacuees bypass them entirely in pursuit of familiar destinations. This creates a vacuum where risk does not disappear, but becomes diffuse, lowering encounter probability at precisely the moment when predictability matters most. The hidden principle here is logistical residue. These zones were designed to move, store, and process materials under continuous operation, which means they contain dormant systems, optimized for durability rather than comfort. Reinforced steel frames, roll-up access points, high ceilings, loading docks, and fenced perimeters form accidental defensive architectures. Many include backup power hookups, industrial water connections, compressed air systems, and mechanical redundancy, intended to prevent production downtime. When operations halt, these systems remain intact, but unconsumed. Technically, industrial buildings offer spatial flexibility unmatched by residential structures. High bay ceilings allow heat stratification, keeping floor-level temperatures stable. Concrete slab floors provide load-bearing capacity for makeshift storage water containers or fuel drums without structural compromise. Loading dock geometry creates elevation barriers that limit vehicle access while permitting controlled observation. Fencing, designed to deter theft, becomes a perimeter control asset. Even basic insulation in these structures often exceeds residential standards due to process temperature requirements. Historical patterns support this resilience. During economic collapses and regional conflicts, populations that avoided refugee corridors and instead occupied semi-industrial peripheries experienced lower exposure to violence and disease. In the aftermath of major hurricanes, small logistics facilities frequently became informal hubs for aid and survival, precisely because they retained generators, forklifts, pallets, and fuel long after retail stores were stripped bare. During supply chain disruptions, fringe warehouses often remain stocked simply because no one thinks to check them until much later. The survival implications are substantial, but conditional. These locations favor those who understand industrial hazards. Chemical storage areas require identification and avoidance. Machinery poses injury risk without power lockouts. Fire load can be high if materials ignite. However, for those capable of assessment, the reward is access to tools, spare parts, packaging materials, protective gear, and shelter space, adaptable to changing needs. Water access is often superior due to industrial-grade piping and floor drains designed for washdown. As evacuation stretches into days and weeks, the psychological landscape shifts. Desperation increases along main routes, while patience becomes a survival trait elsewhere. Fringe zones benefit from this divergence. Their invisibility buys time, but time attracts attention eventually. The window of safety depends on understanding when silence becomes suspicion, and when remaining becomes riskier than moving again. Beyond the industrial edge lies another environment that undergoes a transformation so complete that it reverses its perceived vulnerability entirely. It is a place people abandon out of fear of isolation, yet isolation becomes its greatest strength once the crowd disappears. Governed by principles of energy independence and ecological buffering rather than concrete or steel. When evacuation narratives dominate public consciousness, rural and semi-rural infrastructure is framed as exposed, unsupported, and unsustainable, driving people away from it precisely when population pressure is about to invert its risk profile. The fourth location that becomes stronger as others flee is decentralized energy-positive properties on the rural periphery, including farms, water-adjacent homesteads, and off-grid or hybrid grid installations designed for long-duration autonomy rather than short-term comfort. These environments do not resist collapse. They absorb it. The immediate misunderstanding lies in the belief that safety depends on proximity to aid. In reality, aid follows density, and density is what fails first. Rural systems are built around low population load, meaning water wells, septic systems, and local energy generation are already scaled for independence. When surrounding populations evacuate toward centralized shelters or urban exits, these systems experience reduced stress rather than increased demand. The absence of newcomers preserves stability. The hidden science at work is energy return on investment under reduced consumption. Solar arrays, wind turbines, microhydro systems, and wood-based thermal systems often appear marginal under normal conditions because grid power masks their efficiency. When the grid fails and fuel supply chains fracture, these systems shift from supplemental to primary. With fewer occupants, battery draw decreases, maintenance intervals extend, and thermal regulation becomes manageable with minimal input. Even modest systems outperform expectations when consumption collapses. From a technical standpoint, rural properties offer layered resilience through redundancy rather than strength. Water wells operate independently of municipal pressure systems. Gravity-fed irrigation canals double as non-electric water transport. Soil acts as both a thermal mass and filtration medium. Agricultural outbuildings provide modular shelter and storage, with ventilation profiles optimized for humidity control. Livestock fencing and natural terrain features create movement barriers that do not advertise defensive intent. Historical evidence underscores this pattern. During prolonged blackouts and fuel shortages, rural electrification cooperatives restored power faster than urban utilities due to simpler networks. In economic crises, subsistence farms maintained caloric stability, while urban populations faced supply gaps within days. During pandemics, rural zones with low population density consistently recorded lower transmission rates and longer system endurance. The practical survival implications are deeply tied to competence rather than location alone. These environments reward those who understand seasonal cycles, water rights, and equipment maintenance. They punish those who arrive late, without skills, as local communities quickly close ranks to protect limited resources. Visibility becomes the primary risk, not attack. Smoke plumes, noise, and vehicle movement travel farther in open landscapes than in cities, requiring behavioral discipline. As evacuation continues and centralized systems degrade further, rural strongholds face a delayed but intense challenge. Migratory pressure increases once urban resources are exhausted, shifting risk from neglect to discovery. At that point, adaptability and early preparation determine whether isolation remains an advantage or becomes a liability. There is, however, one final category of location that behaves differently from all others. It does not rely on remoteness, mass depth, or land, but on continuity, mobility constraints, and the overlooked mathematics of flow control. It is abandoned reflexively during evacuation, yet it becomes one of the most defensible environments, precisely because people cannot imagine staying there. The last location that hardens as evacuation accelerates is linear infrastructure designed for controlled movement rather than habitation. Specifically, water-adjacent transit corridors and fixed maritime structures such as inland marinas, canal-side facilities, decommissioned. Ferry terminals and riverine service platforms. These places are instinctively abandoned because people associate water with vulnerability, flooding, and isolation. Yet once mass movement begins, these same properties invert risk by severing approach vectors and collapsing human flow into narrow, defensible geography. The immediate problem most people fail to see is that human threat scales with accessibility, not proximity. Roads allow infinite approach angles and vehicle-based escalation. Water limits movement to predictable channels governed by physics, visibility, and fuel constraints. When evacuation empties land routes, riverbanks and canal edges become natural moats. Bridges act as hard choke points. Tidal schedules, currents and depth restrictions impose barriers that cannot be bypassed without skill or equipment. As panic drains inland, these environments grow quieter, not more dangerous. The hidden principle operating here is flow restriction under energy scarcity. Boats require maintenance, fuel, and knowledge to operate safely. Once fuel distribution falters, the number of viable watercraft drops sharply. Those remaining become loud, visible, and slow relative to line of sight across open water. Unlike roads, waterways offer no concealment for mass approach. This creates a defensive asymmetry, where detection precedes contact by minutes rather than seconds, allowing response without confrontation. Technically, maritime and canal-side infrastructure is built for constant environmental stress. Piers are engineered for dynamic load corrosion resistance and impact absorption. Utility hookups for shore power and water are common. Cleats, pilings, and concrete edges provide anchoring and barricade options. Many inland marinas include maintenance sheds, fuel storage areas, and elevated observation points designed to monitor vessel traffic. Fixed ferry terminals often sit on reinforced foundations with limited access ramps that can be obstructed or dismantled with minimal effort. Historical evidence supports the durability of these locations under strain. During sieges and prolonged unrest, river-adjacent populations have repeatedly used water barriers to maintain separation without fortification. In disaster zones, where roads failed or became congested, waterways served as controlled corridors for aid precisely because they resisted crowd pressure. Conversely, when those corridors were not needed, they became empty, quiet, and defensible spaces, largely ignored by fleeing populations. The survival implications hinge on restraint and understanding. These environments favor early occupancy, before evacuation completes, when supplies and access remain intact. They punish overexposure. Light discipline, weight control, and noise suppression become critical. Freshwater access must be managed carefully due to contamination risk. Weather and seasonal flow patterns impose constraints that must be respected rather than fought. Yet when managed correctly, these locations offer separation without isolation, visibility without exposure, and defense without aggression. As these 5 locations reveal themselves through abandonment rather than fortification, a larger pattern emerges. Survival during evacuation is not about fleeing faster or farther, but about understanding how systems shed load, how humans concentrate, risk, and how structures behave once their intended purpose collapses. Places do not become safe because they are hidden. They become safe because everyone else leaves them, at the same time draining pressure faster than decay can replace it. The final warning is not about choosing the perfect refuge, but about timing and perception. Every environment transitions through phases where advantage becomes liability. Those who survive are not the ones who seek comfort or consensus, but those who recognize when silence is strength, when emptiness is protection, and when movement itself becomes the most dangerous act of all.